Welcome everyone to this video, which is all about colour mixing. Some of you might have one of these colour wheels, and this takes a very basic way of looking at colour mixing and sort of follows the kind of thing that we might have learnt in school about how to mix primary colours together to make a secondary colour. So for example, if you take your red at the top here and add yellow to it, it gives you orange. And if you take your blue and add red to it, it gives you violet. So most of us are fairly familiar with these principles. But when it comes to paint and pigment, it's not quite so straightforward, because pigment is made up of lots of different kinds of colours. So on this course I recommend what's known as a double primary palette, which means that you have a warm and a cool version of each colour. And so with the two yellows, for example, if you were to look at the labels, you probably can't see an awful lot of difference in the colour. But when the colour is out on the palette, it looks very different, with the lemon yellow looking almost green. And that's because the cadmium yellow, which is this one, has more red in it to give it a warmer hue, and the lemon yellow has less, giving it the greener hue when compared to the cadmium. And for the warm red, we have a cadmium red, and the cool red is actually a rose colour, and this is called quinacridone rose, but you could also use permanent rose or rose madder to give you a similar effect. And even blues have more or less warm or cool pigment in, so ultramarine is quite a warm blue, leaning a little bit towards violet with some red in the pigment. And this one, which is a phthalo blue, is much cooler and leaning towards a greener blue. And the importance of this when you start to mix colours is in being able to predict what will happen. So most of you will know that if you mix three primaries together, you will get a brown. So if I mix some cadmium yellow with some red, that gives me an orange. And then if I put a little bit of blue in it, I get a brown colour. And what happens if you mix two colours together and end up with a muddy colour is really the same thing as happens when you mix a brown. You're getting three primaries instead of two. Here are some examples. If I want to mix a violet, I want to pick a red that doesn't have a lot of yellow in it, because that yellow is going to make my violet more brown. And I'll show you what I mean. So we know that red and blue makes violet, but if I mix cadmium red, which is a very yellow red, with my ultramarine, what I end up with is more of a maroon kind of colour. So it's a little bit dirty looking, and that's the yellow in the pigment, in the cadmium red, that's doing that. So instead I pick a cool red, which is my rose, and it's okay to pick my ultramarine again because that has some red in it. And that gives me a much purer violet colour without the yellow that's making the other purple look a bit muddy. Conversely, if I want to mix a green, I need to make sure that my yellow doesn't have a lot of red in it. So if I mix green using a cadmium yellow and ultramarine, which has a little bit of red in it as well, I'll have a green that looks quite olive-like, and that's the red tones in the yellow and the blue doing that. So by picking a yellow like a lemon yellow that has very little red in it, with a phthalo blue, again with very little red in it, I can mix a much purer looking green. So in each of these examples, the addition of a pigment that I don't really want in the mix is tending the colour more towards a browner, muddier version. And there's nothing wrong with muddy colours. You need them sometimes, but it's good to be able to know how to mix them without achieving mud if you want to mix pure colours. So the final secondary combination is a orange, and if I mix that with the lemon yellow, which doesn't have very warm cast, and my quinacridone rose, I will get that kind of an orange, which looks a little bit tan. But if I mix the cadmium, which has a red tinge, a warmer cast to it, with the cadmium red, I will have a much brighter, cleaner looking orange. So that's the principle behind having a double primary palette. It allows you to choose the right blue, red or yellow to make the colour that you want.